elements that we're looking for. Offer, acceptance, consideration, and intention to create legal relations. We need to have each of those four aspects. Today we're going to look at offer and acceptance, which I think generally the way the course goes is that this is the easiest, and then it gets progressively harder in terms of the content. So we have, and I think this is common in civil law jurisdictions, you have the concept of an offer. In the common law, you have an offer and an invitation to treat. And those are two different concepts when we're looking at the idea of an offer. An offer is an element of formation of a contract. Invitation to treat is not. Invitation to treat is, well, what would be an example in your estimation?
Display of goods in a shop?
Sorry?
Display of goods, like in a shop?
So in a shop, you have goods displayed. That's not an offer to customers. That's an invitation for customers to engage in the process of purchase. Another example would be an advertisement online or in a newspaper. That isn't necessarily an offer. Now we'll see how an invitation to treat can become an offer with a case bit later. But as concepts, offer and invitation to treat are very different. And we can see this with the first case of Harvey and Facey. What happened in this case?
The potential buyer sent a telegram asking to sell bumper pen, and the potential seller responded that the lowest price will be this, and the potential buyer treated this as an offer, and deemed that yes, they are ready to proceed with the purchase.
Right.
Because they thought that it was an offer
Yeah.
to buy for.
Why did they think it was an offer? What would be the argument? Because this went to the Privy Council. So if you remember foundations, this would be the highest appellate court within the Commonwealth, keeping in mind this is the 19th century. So it had to get this far somehow.
Yeah, they said it's the lowest price.
Right, but how is that an offer? How is this situation one that can be argued as an offer?
Well, the offer was, the person that was selling the property said, this is the lowest price it would accept. So if you met that term, right, the term of the lowest amount, you could argue it would be an offer because you met the term, so it's
Okay.
So basically that selling the lowest price is an indication of the willingness to sell.
Right.
Price itself means selling something, right? So that was, because that was the question, if there is really a willingness of selling or not. That was the argument, we didn't really want to.
But it's more than willingness, isn't it? You may be willing to sell your home, but going through and actually selling it is probably something different. I think that's what Harvey is showing. There was a willingness to sell the property. The question is, was there an intention behind this response to the question, will you sell this property? Tell me the lowest price. So, what do we glean from this in terms of offer and acceptance by inference? The question here is, what's the minimum to constitute an offer? And what we see is the courts are going to scrutinize the scenario and look for a clear statement that the item in question was being put on offer. Because, why I say a clear statement is because arguably Harvey's saying, tell me the lowest price and I'll pay it. Arguably, Stacy responding to that, we can say, constitutes, he must understand that this is an engagement into a contractual relationship. So by responding, he must know that this would be binding, that this would be a contract. And the court did not accept that. Now, why would the court not accept this? And as I say, it's useful, I pointed out, it's useful to take a look at the level of the court. So for our purposes, this is like a Supreme Court decision. And Supreme Courts don't take random cases. There must have been something here that it was looking for, that it felt that it was necessary to engage in. Otherwise, it would have dismissed, it would have rejected leave to appeal. So what instruction do we get from Harvey, do you think, in terms of advising on the idea or the concept of offer?
There should be a clear statement of the intention to sell, because when they send the telegram, they ask two questions. Are you willing to sell, and what is the lowest price?
Yeah.
And the seller only responded with the price, so they didn't say, yes, I'm willing to sell. So I understand that the Privy Council said that they did not express this intention, so.
And why is that important here? What is a contract? How do you understand a contract?
Well, if you're looking for a mirror image between offer and acceptance, then the offer must be explicit and very clear. Otherwise, acceptance cannot follow to mirror the image of the offer. So
Sure.
unless there is, this is the offer and response, we are accepting your offer.
Yeah,
There is no
but
contract.
we know in the common law today, we don't need to necessarily have that exact mirror image. Like in Roman law, we don't have sort of magical terms. It'd be great if everybody said, I accept your offer of ... But that doesn't necessarily always happen.
I mean, the intention is not clear. Providing the
Right.
price doesn't mean that anyone is selling.
Right?
Yeah.
And why would, yeah,
When you give an offer, when you, this is an invitation to an offer, and the other is giving an offer, then
Mhm.
you give the other the power of acceptance.
right,
When he said the lowest price was £900, he did not meant to give the power of acceptance to the other party, meaning, if you say yes, then it's a binding contract.
yeah,
Yeah, we are looking to the words itself, in order to say whether it's an offer or not, the words that constitutes the offer. Just mere equations of price is not going to constitute an offer. But the main idea here, looking at the words itself, in order to get, we have a clear intention to be binding upon acceptance. There is no further discussion or negotiation.
okay. Yeah,
When I read it, it's almost as if fly opens up the bargaining process.
Right.
When I read that,
Mhm.
that's why I don't think there's a clear intention and there's no offer acceptance. Just by saying, look, I'll start at this price, I think it engages both parties to participate in negotiation. I think that's why the council said that it's not an offer acceptance in the true sense.
And also,
I haven't read the case, but there's I mean, and we know what the outcome is, but there's an implied offer to purchase, I guess, at the price that's acceptable to you. So, yes, one has to, I'm just being contrarian because I think it's capable, clearly it's again one of the cases you chose, because in a sense, when someone says to you, will you sell it and what is the price you're prepared to charge? And you write back with the price, I think is an implied suggestion that you're prepared to sell it.
Well, and that's the question I posed at the start. Why was this not an offer? And the point that I think we have to take from this is, recall what a contract is. You've all had experience with contracts, I believe. Once you sign and enter into a contract, it's hard to get out of it. And this is especially so in the common law. Common law courts are reluctant to let parties out of contracts once they've been signed. That's not to say it doesn't happen. We'll look at reasons why it would happen. But courts, starting with the English courts, saw the contract as an important mechanism that allowed private parties to enter into mutual obligations with the added point that courts are saying we will give force to these private arrangements. We will enforce them. So if we look at Harvey and Facey, and courts approach contracts as agreements that you cannot get out of, there's an importance placed on how the contract is formed. And because of that, because of the consequences of entering into a contract, the courts add further scrutiny to the formation aspect of contracts. They will want to see not an arguable intention, which I say we have in Harvey and Facey, but a clear intention. Because once parties have agreed and met the conditions of formation, courts don't want parties coming up and saying, well, I don't like this contract anymore. I need to get out of it. So with Harvey and Facey, and why I start with this case is I talked yesterday about understanding the philosophy behind the cases. This is a good illustration of that point. There's added scrutiny at the formation stage of, especially in offer, of a clear intention to be found. Because the courts, once formation has been concluded, the courts say, you can't get out of this, except in rare circumstances. So there's a force behind this case that speaks more than just what the facts and the reasoning give to us. It elaborates on, for lack of a better term, a philosophy behind contracts and how the courts approach it. So the next couple of cases, I think, really are variations on that point. Johnson Brothers and Canadian Dyers Association. I think more can be extracted, a along this idea of understanding what is happening with an offer if we move to the Pharmaceutical Society of Great Britain and Boots case. So if you've never been to the UK, Boots is like their version of Shoppers Drug Mart. Boots is everywhere. And what's interesting about this is that it's the Pharmaceutical Society that's suing Boots. Why are they bringing this action?
Because there is a regulatory requirement say that when you sell some medicine to customers, then this selling should be under the supervision of pharmacists.
Okay,
So-
so actually, what has transpired here? I walk into a Boots shop and I pick an item off of the shelf and put it into my basket. And then take it up to the cashier. He rings it through and I take the item. In terms of offer and acceptance, how do we map out this transaction? When does offer come in?
When you put the shoes,
Sorry?
when you put the shoes for the cashier, here it is the offer.
So when you're at the cashier?
Yes.
Yeah?
I think, like, in my opinion, once they put the price of the item, it's an offer, and when you grab that item, it means acceptance of the offer.
That's what the Pharmaceutical Society argued, and the Court of Appeal rejected that. Why did they reject it?
They said the display is only an invitation to an offer,
Right, invitation to treat.
sorry. Going to the register, that's basically the offer, and the acceptance is
So who's making the offer at the cash register?
the buyer.
The customer.
The customer is making an offer,
And the retailer is accepting that offer.
and that's the acceptance.
Right. So this is actually contrary to what you might think happens, or what a layperson may think happens in a business. A layperson may go into a shop and say, well, all those items on the shelves, those are offers to me. But what Boots shows us is that, in fact, those are invitations to treat, and it's the customer that actually makes the offer. If we want to itemize that offer, the offer is, I offer to buy this item at your stated price. That's implied when the customer brings the item to the cash register. Yeah.
The court also gave the example of like how it could be commercially unworkable. And it's just as where, let's say you do pick up an item off the shelf and then you decide to change your mind and you want to put it back.
That's why I was going to go to next. This is why the court rejected the Pharmaceutical Society's argument. Because the transaction does not operate that once you take an item off the shelf and put it in the basket, there's this imaginary gate that says you're locked into this. You can put the item back. You have the choice. The transaction is not complete until you get to the cash register.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, like, any displayed item gonna be considered as an invitation to treat?
Yeah.
Because sometimes they put like a big sign like off, for example, like 3 at the price of 1.
Right.
Isn't it like an offer?
No, that'd still be an invitation to treat. So they use, sorry, this is sort of the difficulty when you study law. You learn the proper use of the words. Whereas in consumer commerce, we use words rather loosely. So when a shop says offer, for us that's really more like an invitation to treat. Now, in a few minutes, we'll look at a case where an offer or invitation to treat became an offer. But generally speaking, advertisements or signs in shop windows are invitations to treat.
the practical problem can be overcome by simply withdrawing the acceptance before it comes to the attention of the party that's putting it on offer. So, in other words, when you put it down, you've actually withdrawn your acceptance.
Yeah.
And that's the end of it. So I'm not sure that it's such a big, well, it's such a major issue of impracticality.
Well, why was it an issue in this case, though?
In this case, exactly, because the issue, because the question was if there is a pharmacist overviewing the whole process. So if it was only an invitation to treat, and then the customer makes an offer, and the pharmacist was there, and he could say, no, you cannot buy this because whatever, you don't have a prescription, or this is for children, or this is for that, or just have to say how to use it, you know? The pharmacist was there, and so he could say not to accept, not to sell the product.
I suppose it could be a conditional offer potentially, but
well, it was important in this case.
Into the impracticality argument or rationale, because you can overcome that, you know, the idea of, well, when you pick it up, oh well, you've got to pay for it. Well, frankly, no, you can withdraw your offer or your acceptance.
Right, but nonetheless, the Pharmaceutical Society was saying not only was that not the case, but there is a violation of regulatory law attached to that. And we see that in the next case of Dowler. Yeah, you know, that'll come back.
So what will be the case if the customer goes to the self-checkout, let's say, and there is no self-checkout, and there is no pharmacist, so who will accept the offer?
Then Boots has a problem.
The machine.
The machine will accept.
Yeah.
But the thing, if this is a regulated item. So the way things happen now, if we go to Shoppers Drug Mart, is regulated items would be only accessible through the pharmacist. All the other items you can buy without pharmacist supervision. So the self-checkout could still work. But usually my understanding is, in Canada, when you purchase a regulated item that has to have a pharmacist supervising, you only get it from them and you pay at that moment. So it still gets around this issue of whether or not the item is supervised. And then
Similar question, like what if the cashier accepted the offer, but the pharmacist wasn't there? Yeah. So
well,
do
then
we have
Boots,
a contract? Like
then Boots would have an issue. So the idea would, and I don't know how they operated in the 1950s, late 1940s, depending on the case, but presumably pharmacists oversaw the process. So it wasn't like today where we have maybe one pharmacist on staff and then regular staff who aren't pharmacists doing other things. So that's why I'm saying today, those items would be only accessible through a pharmacist. And presumably that was the case then.
Yeah. I don't think the idea of a controlled item can only be paid where the pharmacist, is present. Because sometimes you are picking more than one stuff. This is what happens all the time. You're picking more than one stuff, something that is controlled under the supervision of the pharmacist, and you have other stuff too you're picking in the store.
Right.
And sometimes they tell you, okay, you can go pay at the other cashier's desk. So, if after taking the stuff that is controlled from the from the pharmacist, and you go ahead to pick other stuff, you don't necessarily have to go back to the pharmacist. You can pick that and go, to another cashier and cash out.
Yeah.
So
that would be a separate point, I think, here, because by law, if it's a controlled item, the pharmacist should be handling it. If they basically delegate it and say you can go buy other things and don't pick up on the item, then arguably that is a regulatory offense.
Okay.
The next case, R versus Dawood. So this is a criminal case, but similar to Boots, it has contract implications. So this woman tries to get clothing for a lower price and removes the tag on a cheaper item, puts it on a more expensive item, and tries to get away with it. Was this a fraud or a theft?
I think that's fraud.
Why?
Yeah, because she was yet to leave the store. Because if she had gone out of the store with the item, that would have been theft.
Right?
Yeah.
Then what's the dissent? Sorry, go ahead.
So basically the question was again, if it's an invitation to treat or it's an offer. So the majority said that it was an invitation to treat, the price tag. So going to the cashier and paying the price was making an offer. When he paid, basically the contract was formed, but it was fraudulent. Fraudulent.
Yeah.
Fraudulent, sorry. So it's a fraud.
Right.
And the dissent said, no, the offer was the price tag.
Yeah.
So when he took the items, he accepted the offer, but basically it was a theft.
So based on Boots, who's right? If we apply Boots as a precedent, which the
And
court...
the majority applied Boots.
Right. So arguably the dissent is misinterpreting the way the transaction rose in the dissent. So this is, it's an interesting exercise to look at, I think, to understand offer and acceptance in these different scenarios, because it has wider implications. I'll just note Partridge and Crittenden, that is usually the authority for advertisements, usually being invitations to treat. And we'll go down to unilateral contracts with Carlyle and Carbolic Smokeball. Has anybody studied in the UK or Canada? Okay. So you know this case. So what happened in Carbolic?
Yes, more close.
What happened here? Yep.
Essentially, you have Carbolic Smokeball Company. Essentially, it was during a time when they had influenza, and they pretty much put out an advertisement stipulating that if you were to use this ball following our methods of utilizing it 3 times a day, etc., and if you still contract the disease, you'll be entitled to 100 pounds.
Yeah.
And so,
Which in the late 19th century is quite a bit of money.
and so essentially what happened was the claimant in this case pretty much utilized the item. She contracted influenza, and then pretty much she tried to claim for the 100 pounds.
Right. And what did Carbolic say?
I believe they referred to the advertisement as a pub. They didn't actually have intentions to actually provide, to give out the funds for that purpose, but just to kind of just amp up their advertisement.
It was an invitation to treat. It was not intended to be binding, is what Carbolic is saying. We didn't do anything here that should have led objectively anyone to think that we were intending to be bound by this advertisement. And arguably, if advertisements are invitations to treat, they're right. But this is a landmark decision that found otherwise. Why did the Court of Appeal find otherwise here?
This is a unilateral contract.
Meaning what?
Meaning it was a contract that once somebody fulfilled the requirements or the parameters of the actual statement, I guess, of the contract, and it was automatically fulfilled. And I think they tried to argue as well that it was a contract to the entire world.
Yep.
The court back came back and said that it was a contract only specifically to those persons that actually used or purchased the product in accordance with the rules. So once the condition was met for this contract that was placed in London paper, it was fulfilled. They didn't need anything more.
So a unilateral contract means you can put, the classic example is a lost pet. You put an advertisement, lost pet, $100 for the return of the pet. That's a unilateral contract, an offer to the world. How does acceptance come about?
By performance.
Sorry?
By performance.
Right. So, and to be more precise, as soon as somebody starts looking for the lost pet, that's when performance starts and acceptance starts. But you haven't completed the obligation until you find the pet and return it. So here, Ms. Carlil did perform and accept in full what Carbolic requested.
Just requested that it should have been on the premises.
Sorry?
That it should have happened on the premises.
Yeah, but the advertisement said,
Nothing about it.
Yeah.
So that was rejected.
yeah, so
Right
they said
away.
use it 3 times a day for 2 weeks,
Yes.
and if you're still sick, we'll give you £100.
So this was rejected right away.
Yeah.
That was easy.
So,
And then they said that they were very vague. That the whole advertisement was vague and the reward and everything
Who said?
was.
Carbolic?
The company.
Yeah.
The company said it was very vague, so it was not a real promise. It was not a real.
right, and,
So the
yeah,
court said it was not drastically vague. It was not so vague that you couldn't understand really the conditions.
yeah.
I thought the court dealt with a waiver here. Is there a waiver in this?
No,
agreement?
that's what we're talking about with the, how acceptance is carried out in a unilateral contract.
But-
Technically, we'll see when we look at acceptance in more detail, you have to communicate acceptance. The loophole, so to speak, in a unilateral contract is the offeror has no idea who has accepted the offer. So using my pet example, there could be 10 people looking for that pet. The offeror has no idea who these people are or how many there are. So acceptance, communication of acceptance has been waived. That's what the waiver is. So here we have one element that Ms. Carlil used the item as directed and was still sick. But that wasn't sufficient here to say that this advertisement was not an invitation to treat, but in fact a unilateral contract. What else was there that led the Court of Appeal to conclude that this was a unilateral contract?
So in terms of contextual factors, the company also deposited £1,000 to the local branch.
Right, and put that in the advertisement.
Yes.
So the Court of Appeals said, you told everyone, use this as directed, and if you're still sick, we'll reimburse you. And to show you we're serious, we have opened an account in this bank, deposited £1,000, and the Court of Appeals said that showed Carbolic's intention to be bound. So by doing these two things, Carbolic has converted, if you will, an invitation to treat into a unilateral contract, an offer. Because they denoted through the advertisement their intention to be bound. Not just through the advertisement, but by their conduct. They opened the bank account and deposited the money. So, I think sometimes we can lose a bit in the conversion. £1,000 in a bank account in the 1890s is a huge amount. So the court is taking notice. This wasn't just they threw £50 in and said, we open this account. There was a lot of weight behind this, the court said, was saying. So this is a novel case because of the facts. Well, we have that precedent of an advertisement being an invitation to treat. Carvalho changed that through the facts in this case. So we have a new precedent coming out of it. And we see sort of a, I don't know if it's humorous or not, but the Goldthorpe case, basically doing the same thing. Goldthorpe and Logan. Yeah, so I was kind of troubled, and I don't know how this came about, but in the note I gave you, her husband alleges that he has had great worry and suffering as a result of his wife's condition. Only in 1943 could that be a pleading in a court of law, I think. So basically this woman goes to this place trying to get excess hair removed. The people there say, we can do it. Turns out they can't. They guaranteed it. Turns out they can't. Now, I've given you the advertisement just to give another example of this idea of a unilateral contract coming out of Carlisle. Hair is removed safely and permanently by electrolysis, no marks, no scars, results guaranteed, and gives the name of the person and the location. And this, the court said, was a unilateral contract. Now, arguably, we don't have the same elements as Carlisle. Arguably, this is a lower threshold, that advertisement. But if we read through the court's reasoning, they supplement that through Ms. Goldthorpe going for several treatments and being reassured at the facility of the results, that things will eventually work. And today, today we have consumer protection legislation to give effect to what the common law was doing in the 1940s here. I talked a bit about this idea of, in a unilateral contract, acceptance being an ongoing item. You're performing acceptance. How does Arrington illustrate performance of acceptance in a unilateral contract? Why did the daughter-in-law keep the property? Yeah.
Because by paying the mortgage every month, that was accepted.
Yeah. So she was in a process of performing acceptance. So when we have this idea of a unilateral contract, an offer being made, the completion of the contract is delayed until the person, the acceptor, performs what is requested. So Arrington, and coupled with Dahlia Limited, say the offeror cannot revoke an offer once acceptance has started to be performed. In Arrington, if the daughter-in-law missed a payment, maybe then the offer could be revoked. But while she is still performing acceptance, it cannot be revoked.
I think equity here is going to intervene.
Sorry, equity?
Equity is going to intervene. It is not fair someone in the middle of the acceptance and say, no, we're going to revoke the offer, end the offer. It's going to be unfair. Equity.
Yeah, I haven't brought in, I've been very careful about talking about equity just because I don't think everybody has taken property or been introduced to equity, and it kind of complicates things.
If there is a case law going on there.
We'll look at promissory estoppel, which usually makes people want to quit law. That brings equity in. And we'll see it more clearly there. For now, I would say we'll just stick with the common law aspect. Any other questions before we move to the tendering process?
I'm wondering when is the start of the contract, because in here we say it's a unilateral contract when the offer is being made.
What do you mean by the start of the contract?
I mean, there is no acceptance here, just an offer.
Well, but remember, acceptance is performance. So if we think again of Miss Carlil and Carbalda, Smokeball, her acceptance, remember the gentleman's question about acceptance being waived, communication of acceptance. All she had to do was purchase the item and perform as directed. So the contract starts when she purchases the item and starts using the product.
So during the advertisement process, there is no contract.
No, but it's an offer that's there for anyone that sees it to take up.
Yeah. So we can say it's a unilateral offer, not a unilateral contract.
You can call it a unilateral offer. I called it a unilateral contract to underscore that this is binding.
But there is no contract.
No,
there is no acceptance.
There is. The
Unless
acceptance
there
is
is no
the
acceptance.
paying the mortgage.
Right, but in the cases we've looked at, there has been a contract.
There has been a performance.
Yeah.
The term itself is the
So
contradiction.
the offer was this: I buy you this
As with
house,
many things.
and you on my name, but the house will be yours if you pay the mortgage. And when you pay up the mortgage, then you get the house.
So
They started to pay the mortgage, right?
Yeah.
So that's the acceptance. That's the performance,
So
which is the
I
acceptance.
think your point is, until it's accepted, it's an offer,
Yes.
which is right. But I've called this a unilateral contract in the notes because we've seen the completion of the terms. And to underscore that this is a binding arrangement. That's all.
Yeah, I think the problem is that it's never finished. It's not finished yet. That's right. The mortgage was not still paid. It was in the middle of the performance.
Tendering process. Construction work in contract law is an entertaining area. Something that I've marveled at is I don't think there's a historical example of a construction project actually having been finished on time. Certainly Toronto, I think, is an example. So this is what we're entering into. You largely a construction scenario where somebody wants something built and they put out what's called a call for tenders. So I've given you a quotation or a definition from Trital. A statement inviting tenders for the supply of goods or for the execution of works is not normally an offer. The offer comes from the person who submits the tender, and there is no contract until the person asking for the tenders accepts one of them. So we have this interesting process. Let's say Osgood Hall wants to build a new law school. They put out a call for tenders, and construction companies submit their tenders. Is the submission of tenders an offer or acceptance?
Offer.
To some extent. See, it's a bit tricky. And that's why we have the Ron engineering case, which I don't know if it necessarily cleared things up. It's confused a lot of people over time. But Mr. Justice Esty talked about contract A and contract B. What is a contract A?
Contract A is an invitation to make an offer bid, basically.
Well, I think that the contract A is actually an offer to be bound by the offer for a specific number of days by way of quoting the works at a certain price, giving a deposit, as well as a contract that if the offer has been accepted by the offerer to sign the contract for the works, which is scheduled. I think that's the context of scheduling.
So going back to the gentleman's point about unilateral offer and unilateral contract, part of the confusion from Ron Engineering is that Mr. Justice Esty talks about two contracts. Technically, that's incorrect. There's only one contract. But what he's trying to do is explain the process in a way that he thinks is easy to understand. So when Osgood Hall puts out the call for tenders, that's just a call for tenders. The bidders submitting a bid, that is contract A. Why is it called contract A? Do you follow? Yeah.
Well, I think that what the Supreme Court of Canada was saying, that contract A also does have certain rules that have to be carried through. Otherwise, whoever is submitting the bids would be exposed to Wild West, and whoever is collecting bids
So
would
a key
be.
part of that is once you've submitted a bid, and this is the issue in Ron Engineering, you cannot revoke that bid. So if you are, as we all probably are in law, bad at math, and you figure out that you've actually made a mathematical error and underbid, but you've submitted the bid already, you are locked into that bid. You cannot revoke it once you have submitted it. That is contract A. That is what the concept of contract A is talking about. The irrevocability of the bid. So what's contract B?
The application of the bidder, the offer once they apply for the bid. It's like the construction company, if
When they
they apply
choose
for the
someone.
bid.
When Osgood Hall, in my example, chooses a bid, that's contract B. So in technically accurate terms, we only have one contract. When Osgood Hall selects a tender and says, we want to contract with you, we have a contract formed then. So that's why I say the idea of contract A and contract B is a bit misleading. But what Mr. Justice Esty is trying to say, as
I don't know
as
where.
Dayon said, the idea is there are certain obligations attached to the submission of a tender. And Mr. Justice Esty wanted to convey that point by saying this is contract A. He thought by using the word contract, it would convey this idea that there are obligations attached to it. Because in this case, Ron Engineering wanted to withdraw its bid and get its deposit back, and it couldn't. So that's the starting point, sorry.
So isn't this the case with any normal offer? That I wouldn't be able to just withdraw my offer once there's acceptance?
It's a bit different because there's sort of this delay. So think of you submit a term paper, and the next day you think, I totally misunderstood the question, and you want to resubmit. And Osgood Hall will say too bad. That's what's happening here.
Right, because they've already...
Yeah, but there's this delay and you could still technically rectify it. Right, like you've submitted the bid, but the process hasn't been completed. Osgood Hall hasn't selected the winning bid, winning tender. I haven't graded the paper.
Right.
So there's still technically an opportunity, we would think, to rectify the situation. But because of this process, and because of, as I started out with Harvey and Facey, the courts want to underscore that even in this tendering process, we're going to treat it like a contract. Even though it doesn't have all the fittings of a contract, we're going to say, once you submit that bid, you cannot withdraw it. So it's a bit different from a regular offer where you can say, somebody can say, oh, I need to amend that. You know, I really meant to say this. And you can do that with an offer up until the point it's accepted. But in the tendering process, no one bid has been accepted in the facts of Ron Engineering as yet. Yeah.
It sounds like the court's interpretation of the tendering process kind of regulatory scheme. So means that if both parties' intention is to maintain the maximum freedom until this means contract B is entered into, whether this will override the courts.
So you were talking about the maximum freedom?
It means that if both parties want to maintain their position, they are not into contract A until they enter into contract B. If both parties intend such.
Yeah, but that's not what the court is saying, right?
Yeah, so if both parties has the intention, otherwise, whether the court will still override the parties' intention, because this is kind of contract.
Well, let's think about, I think underlying your question is, why did the court decide this way? Why would they say you cannot withdraw a bid once you've submitted it?
Because it's tendering.
Sorry?
Because it's tendering process.
Yeah.
It's regulatory public policy.
If anyone could back out of the bid by saying, oh, I made a technical mistake, that would just disrupt the process.
It could, but what often happens in construction is people will underbid. And if the court says, well, you can withdraw your bid at a later time, it allows people to underbid and then say, oh, I didn't really mean that.
Yeah.
So the court is trying to create some level of certainty within this specific area of contract called the tendering process for that reason.
Yeah, because maybe some people just gonna like make a bid to deprive the other party from taking that bid.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's maybe a way like to protect
and that's what the court is trying to do with Ron Engineering.
But actually you can revoke until it's opened, no? If what happened here, they realize the mistake after the bids.
Yeah, but what SD is saying is once you've submitted the bid, you can.
You can change though.
I think
It says you can change.
I think
the
it
con-
depends
un-
on the terms.
Until the deadline.
I think it depends on the terms of the
Tender.
of the tender.
Well, you can revoke the bid at any point in time before the tender closes.
Yes.
And you
that's-
can
that's
change
what
your
happened here.
bids 5 times during one
We just
day, from
haven't
9
realized
o'clock
in time.
until 5 o'clock. The last one is the binding one, but after the closure, it's done.
So then we have these two other cases of MJB Enterprises and Martel Building. And what these cases add is that with wrong engineering, we get the idea that obligations are one way. Only the bidders have obligations. These two cases show that actually the person or entity making the call for tenders has obligations. So in MJB, the Crown picked a non-compliant bidder. So this dealt with a privilege clause, as I explained in the notes. The owner may not accept the lowest bid, that lowest tender received, and need not accept any tender for the project. So Osgood Hall will say, we don't have to accept the lowest bid. Some tenders will say lowest bid wins. But this allows the tenderer the opportunity to select a bid and not handcuff it. The problem was, in this case, the Crown picked a non-compliant bidder, someone who didn't follow the rules as the winner. So the Supreme Court said that there's an implied term in contract A that the offeror had an obligation to accept only compliant bids. So only compliant bids can be submitted at the contract A stage, and therefore can go on to potentially be form contract B. And then Martel as the implied duty to treat all bidders fairly and equally. And I note that because this is something that we'll see sort of creeping into Canadian contract law a bit more recently with the organizing principle of good faith. So we'll take a break. I have about 7:20, come back at 7:40. Because if you need coffee, it's a fair ways away. Acceptance. We've kind of touched on this a little bit already with, for example, unilateral contracts or unilateral offers. So Gibbons and Proctor, a person must be aware of an offer. Tin and Hoffman, to me, is another case kind of like Harvey and Facey because it gives us some instruction as to the rationale behind decisions. So the concept here is a cross offer. So if two parties make the identical offers to each other at the same time, can you say there has been acceptance, that there's been a contract formed? And we can make an argument that, well, if they intended to be bound by the terms they put forward, and they were both the same, why can't we? And Mr. Justice Blackburn elaborated on why this is not a contract. His focus was on the possibility of revocation. And he, just reading from the quotation I gave you, such grave inconvenience would arise in mercantile business if people could doubt whether there was an acceptance or not. It is desirable to keep to the rule that an offer that has been made should be accepted by an acceptance such as would leave no doubt on the matter. And I pair this with Harvey and Facey because Blackburn is saying, in speaking for the common law, we are going to err on the side of something more substantial, something more significant being communicated here, something more unequivocal that leaves little or no doubt regarding whether or not the parties have made an offer and that offer has been accepted. And again, implied in this reasoning is what I talked about with Harvey and Facey, that the courts take very seriously the signing of a contract. Two parties agreeing to be bound by terms outlined in a contract. And they're reluctant to let parties out of those arrangements. That then places a significant emphasis on the formation stage, that the parties did intend to be bound by this arrangement or these terms. And so Tin and Hoffman, Harvey and Facey give us that, what I was calling before, philosophy behind contract courts' decision making. What is it that informs their decision making? Blair and Western Mutual is sort of an entertaining case, I thought, but also instructive for our purposes. Why was there no contract here?
Because the person wasn't aware, the offer wasn't communicated.
Right, but she's saying it was communicated. I know it's been communicated, I'm speaking on her behalf, because I was there taking notes in this board meeting. So her argument is, they're going to make the offer, and I want to get the hell out of here. And I can't get out of here fast enough, it seems. She really hated her job.
So what it appears that nobody knew that there was going to be a contract. There was no intention between the parties. Like this statement would end up being a legal binding contract. So that's why it didn't amount to an offer. But in other words, there was no intention to create a legal relationship.
I think unless the offer had, so the party making the offer had the opportunity to back out at any point in time. So they couldn't have never made that offer at all. And in fact, they didn't.
Yeah.
They did not approach her and put this, like, these are the terms that we're offering.
Let me give you a scenario. I'm going to buy a car from Daya.
I'm not seller, believe me.
I'm sure you are.
I'm just selling just a lemon.
So I intend to do this. I haven't said anything to him. And I've actually even taken the step of clearing out space in my garage to park the car. Is that sufficient for there to be a contractual relationship?
No.
Why? I have the intention.
No communication.
Has been communicated, an offer has been made. So there are certain formalities that we need to have, and Blair underscores this point, that the formality of telling Blair, what was it, they were offering her early retirement or something?
2 years salary.
2 years salary when she retired. The formality of making that written offer, assuming they would make it in writing, had not been taken. So their intention might have been one thing, but intention alone is not enough. So we've talked a bit about intention being an important element, but it's not singular in terms of the criteria we are seeking. I haven't been able to find out if she got her job back. Williams and Carwardine So when you see Paradigm, then R and Clark, these are both cases where there's a reward for giving information about a crime. Why was there a contract or not a contract in these scenarios? Either one. So one goes one way, one goes the other.
In one case, there was also an intention. So
So in Williams,
in Williams, there was an intention to get the reward. And in Clark, as I understood, the person gave out this information about the murder only to get the charges dropped. And then at some point later, he learned that there was also a reward offered. So initially, there was no intention on the part when he gave this information.
Mm-hmm. So Clark seems to be a bit more of a strict approach to this. That the person giving the information must be doing so with the intention regarding the award, and they must know of the award. Arguably, they didn't know at the time. Coupled with, they have to be saying it with the intention.
Well, going back to Terboli balls,
Yeah.
It's a little bit hard to do reconciliation because the performance was actually acceptance of the contract. So intention in Terboli ball was completely irrelevant. Just the sheer performance was actually acceptance.
Yeah, but isn't there intention within that? Like, she went and purchased the smoke ball. She intended to, she didn't get it by accident.
Yeah, but she purchased the smoke ball to stay healthy with her family, not to claim the contract or accept the contract. Her intention was never there, other than when she contracted sickness, that she performed and she said yes.
She was
So-
convinced.
Then the question would be though,
You said that in unilateral offers, it's the time window open for the acceptance.
Yeah.
So,
but the question then is, what is being offered and what has to be acceptance? She bought the smoke ball and used it as directed. Is that not sufficient for the court? It seemed to be that was all that was sufficient. Why she bought it, like other reasons like getting healthy, weren't really part of it. And I think you're contrasting it with the Williams case.
no, with Clark.
With Clark, where there the person didn't know about the reward, sorry.
I think he did at some point in time. He
Later on.
Yeah, and then he did a statement that the fact that he provided information was nothing about the award, that was not the reason he was co-accused, and he offered this.
And that's why I say in Clark, this is a bit more of a strict approach to acceptance. That I wonder if really part of the maybe policy consideration here is they didn't want Clark getting the reward.
Because he was a co-accused.
Yeah. And they don't want people, if you and your buddy decide to commit a murder and he messes it up and you say, oh, and there's a reward, and you say, here's the guy.
Yes, but also there is a reward.
Sorry.
I also look at it like there was a reward, and he got already a reward, sort of, because by clearing himself, right?
Yeah.
He cleared himself, so that was already sort of advantage.
To some extent, but that I think that's where Dayon's question comes from. Didn't he already get something out of it? So Ms. Carlil bought the smoke bulb just to get better. Here, that's what I'm saying, here, there's a bit more of a narrow interpretation. Couldn't he get off of murder and get the reward? Like, what's the bar to that? And what I'm saying is, I think the court just didn't want this guy to be benefiting from his own nefarious conduct.
Well, if I may just say in millions, the one that you put before, the lady actually had information, but she was withholding the information until she got beaten up so badly, then she decided to speak up.
Well, yeah, and this is where we'll see it in tort. The common law is sort of a weird system. We have something in tort with rescuers. So if you see somebody drowning in the sea, do you have to rescue them? No. And oftentimes people won't because they're afraid of being sued.
Because if you screw up something, then you're in big trouble.
Yeah. So the common law is kind of a weird thing. You would think that there's a public policy rationale to say you should save people in distress, but that hasn't quite filtered through. Yeah.
Can I just ask a very generic question about some of the value of these criminal cases and how they impact on the private law?
Yeah.
Is it possible that, I mean, these principles, or certainly Clark, seems a little bit irreconcilable because it's actually a criminal decision. And I see with the other, I was just going back to Darwood as well. And it also gives you a little bit of an odd dissent, not odd, inconsistent.
But what I find in Canadian textbooks in particular is the authors want to create a bit of discussion with the cases sometimes. And other times it's a choice of this case to illustrate this purpose. So if you recall yesterday, I talked about not looking at the cases as a straight line of logical reasoning. And I say R versus Clark is an example of that because it shows that there can be a strict interpretation of what consensus ad idem means that is available to the court. And here is a concrete example. It happens to be a criminal example, but it goes to the point of, in the common law, the cases are malleable in terms of argument, as you know from practice, in terms of argumentation.
I think about the evidence, the evidence in a pure contractual dispute would be different from the evidence stated in a...
Right, but the principle here is just, you can have a liberal interpretation or a strict construction of acceptance. Hyde and Wrench is a classic case that stands for the proposition that a counteroffer kills the initial offer. And it underscores the point that acceptance of an offer must be unequivocal and exactly mirror the offer. Now, this idea of consensus ad idem and mirror image, I think, is tested by the case of Stevenson and Jacques versus McLean. The situation basically in this case, and I'm being very reductive, is Stevenson wanted to know if they could make payment in different ways. Do we have to pay all at once, or can we do it over a couple of months? And McLean took that as a counteroffer. So on the authority of Hyde and Wrench, counteroffer kills the offer. If I'm McLean, I'm saying, well, I don't need to waste my time with these people anymore. But it turns out that this wasn't a counteroffer. The court said this was an inquiry. What's the rationale behind this, do you think? Why would the court not look at this as a counteroffer?
There was no terms.
Sorry?
defined. There was no different terms defined
Well,
by the counter.
this is the thing that, and I'm going to push on the case a bit. I would say if I get 100% of my money now versus 50% now and 50% later, that to me is an important difference.
But it did not say be asked, you know?
Yeah. But so the court says it was couched within this particular language. Please wire whether you would accept 40 for delivery over 2 months, or if not, the longest limit you would give. So the inquiry is, how long can I spread out the payment schedule?
Well, there was also no acceptance of the price, just the inquiry about the term.
Yeah.
There was no magic mirror image wording, I accept your price, but can we stretch it in terms of the payment on different terms?
But I think the original offer said nothing about the payment
No.
conditions. So that's why it was an inquiry. If they said the original offer would claim exactly that it's cash tomorrow,
Yeah.
then this would be a counter offer. But since they left it open,
This is the difficulty I have with the case. I understand the principle behind it. If you ask about the arrangements, that doesn't necessarily constitute a counteroffer. But my question is, at what point does it constitute a counteroffer? Because to me, payment is a key element of any commercial contract. And the timing of payment can be just as important as the payment itself. It could be an important term here.
Does it not depend on what the seller is actually putting out? So as Zita indirectly points out, the seller will specify requirements as in I want payment immediately or whenever.
Yep.
That probably would make a difference.
But I still push on this point that when we get down to money in commercial contracts, people get very fussy. And I think rightly so. I don't think we should write off what McLean said here, or did. You have your hand up.
Yeah, it is. I think he looked at whether it was a deposit or part of the payment. If it was deposit, no return. But if it's part of the payment, it can be.
Sure, and we don't know what.
The problem is the ambiguity itself in the case.
So what I am suggesting we do with this case is remember that not all questions constitute a counteroffer. And we have to be alive to, if this isn't a counteroffer, and we treat it, if this is an inquiry and we treat it as a counteroffer, have we put ourselves in an actionable position? By misinterpreting the scenario, have we put ourselves in that vulnerable position? So the way I take Stevenson is a cautionary case. Be aware of what it is that is happening, and maybe we err on the side of caution, that where we're not sure, we treat it as an inquiry instead of a counteroffer.
Yeah, just I wanted to say, can we say, for example, like a counter offer is something that changed the value of the initial offer?
Yeah, but
For example, like if you are asking what, I'm selling you my car for 40.
Yeah.
40,000,
Yeah.
or 40,000.
Yeah.
Okay, and I said, what about like 20? So that's a counter offer.
Yeah.
But if I ask, what about 2 payments? We are still negotiating the initial offer.
Yeah, and I understand that. I think on a discrete kind of transaction like a car, a private sale between you and I, that's understandable. My question is, at what point does that become a key term? So here, in a commercial arrangement, if somebody's saying, I want to stretch out as long as possible my payment schedule, I take that as an important factor. Now, maybe that's me. But what I'm trying to convey is Stevenson doesn't tell us how to discern what is an inquiry versus what is a counteroffer. But in terms of the practical, what we take from it, what I'm suggesting is we take caution. So if there's something that looks like an inquiry, we think it might be a counteroffer, we should probably err on the side of caution and treat it as an inquiry and not be dismissive like in McLean.
We have to specify.
Yeah.
I mean, you can answer, I take it as an inquiry.
Sure.
And
Yeah, but today
that's
with
my
email,
answer.
a lot of people don't answer. So Butler. What was the case? Butler machine tool. What's happening here factually?
The customer made an order. They entered into a manufacturing contract.
Yeah.
And there were terms and conditions prepared by the seller that contained a clause saying that the price can be amended.
Yeah.
And eventually the seller had to increase the price, and the buyer said they were not willing to pay this extra money because in the order that they placed, they had their own terms.
So what's the issue?
I think the main issue is whether, so if one party thinks that the terms were this and the other party thinks that the terms were different, we need to look at whether these are reconcilable differences or not.
Yeah. So in litigation, it's amazing how often each party's recollection of the facts violently differs. And here we have an example. So how do we address it? Well, the court says we look at it objectively. And this is a case that falls into this category called the battle of the forms. What does that refer to?
Well,
The last for the morning. So, go ahead. Yeah, it is the last
Let's
form.
not be Canadian.
Yeah, yeah. The last form win.
Sorry?
The last form is going to win.
What do you mean?
The last one, it is done, because we have many of them, the last one is gonna win.
So there's an exchange in commercial arrangements of standard form contracts between the parties, which is what happened here. And Lord Denning, the famous or infamous Lord Denning, said the last shot wins, meaning the terms that were last signed or last used, relied upon, are the winners. Which were the winners here? Whose terms won?
Well, the buyer won.
Why?
Yeah.
They made the operator.
No,
Like,
not just that.
Well, first of all, those forms, do you call them contract by adhesion? Because you just get the form, you don't object, and you're stuck with it.
Adhesion is a bit different. This is a standard form contract.
Yes, but they're different. There's a
Yeah.
quote, I quote you that much.
Yep.
With the change of the price, order comes with different,
Yep.
things. And unfortunately, the manufacturer signs the slip and returns the slip back, and the slip says whatever is on the back of your form shall prevail.
And so how does that work here?
Well, Lord Denning said, well, first of all, if you can reconcile two forms, that's the way how the court would go.
Great, but here you couldn't.
Here you couldn't, so his position is you cannot scrap the contract because it's a commercial setting. You have two people, companies in the business, and you cannot just show up and, scrutinize things to the point of making both things in the business of making profit really uncomfortable because they wanted the contract, they wanted the machine. It's just the price that if it cannot be reconciled, that part can get scrapped. What can get reconciled is the contract.
Okay, so here, whose form was signed last? The buyer. The seller signed the buyer's standard form and sent it back. Therefore, that's the last shot. By extension, the seller's added term regarding an additional sum was not part of the contract. The parties agreed to the buyer's terms, not the seller's.
Yeah, would it be correct to say that the performance is already to the last? Because the delivery of the goods is when they found out about the last term. So what in the sense, the contract was complete once the goods were delivered? At that point, it was too late to augment or change the contract? I'm just thinking in terms of continued performance.
Yes and no. The question is, whose terms were they performing under? And the court found, well, the sellers signed the buyer's standard form contract and sent it back when the order was completed. So those are the terms that they abide by. The seller was trying to rely upon a term in its standard form contract, but that did not form part of the agreement. So that's why I say yes or no.
What would be the right thing to do for the seller in this situation? So when
Not
they're
sign the form
Yeah.
and send it back?
okay.
Don't sign the slip. Don't sign
Yeah,
it.
like this one was pretty easy. But for whatever reason, something slipped through. Yeah.
I thought in the case they did not only sign that slip, they also sent a letter stating they're entering into this agreement on their own terms. So what's the importance of their own letter? Isn't that part of the agreement too?
Yeah.
That wasn't really addressed in the textbook
No.
and is unclear to me.
No, the court seemed to take the approach that you sign the standard form, and those are the terms that you agreed to. So attaching a letter to that standard form does not amend it, is what the court is saying. So think about it this way. Like, we can all sign an agreement and say, oh, so think of cell phones. We sign the agreement, but we put a letter on it saying we don't want to be extra billed if we're buying from TELUS. Does that have contractual weight? The court is saying no, because the terms that were agreed to were those that were sent to you and you signed acknowledging your acceptance. So the addition of the letter does not amend it. We'll see a bit later. There's something called the parole evidence rule. The parole evidence rule says you cannot orally vary a written contract unless there are certain parameters met. This is similar to it. Prominence is given to the written contract when it's been signed. The letter attached and being sent back was not part of that.
Okay, and what if you said on the slip, I'm accepting this under the circumstances laid out in my letter attached?
Yeah. Then, well, let me put it to you. How would you treat that?
I would see it the opposite way then.
Of what? What does opposite mean?
Then I would say the seller's agreements have to prevail because they made that letter part of the written consent for acceptance.
I don't know. I could see an argument that that's a counteroffer. And if there is no agreement.
With that, yeah, okay, but then that's not an acceptance under the terms of the buyer.
Right, but it's an interesting question that I think I'll give to you tomorrow with a problem question. But acceptance notionally is pretty straightforward. I accept. But what if you accept with conditions? Is that acceptance? Which is kind of what you're saying. You know, so the courts take what we might call the more conservative view. You signed the form following Butler. You agreed to those terms. You're trying to then impose extra terms onto the contract, onto the other party, but they haven't agreed to them. So in this case, if they just ignore that letter, the terms that the parties operate under are the buyers. No matter what the seller tries to do. The better approach, based upon, I think we're picking up on this now, the sort of philosophy behind it, the better approach is to take the route of ensuring things are clear and written down. Not to staple a letter saying, I agree, but here are some other terms. Yeah.
I'm just wondering that since they had this sending to each other the letters and the forms and letters next to the forms, but they started to make the equipment, right? Or this machine.
Right.
So by starting to, it took 10 months, or even they were delayed.
It took longer.
So it was even delayed. So it took them nearly a year to make this machine. So that the action of doing the machine was basically showing that it was not a counteroffer.
Not necessarily.
If you are not accepting the buyer's condition for not having this extra price clause, then you don't start to make the machine.
I understand. The way I'd classify that is, I don't know what you've been told about litigation here. If you see a statement of claim in tort or contract, you'll see all these different arguments. So you'll see X really sucks because of this. In the alternative, X is really horrible because of this. I say your argument is sort of a secondary argument
Yeah, secondary argument.
to the
Yes.
to what the court decided, which is you signed the form, you live with it. He's very
Yes.
bluntly put. Termination. Revocation may be effective when the offeree learns about it indirectly and impliedly. So you have to communicate revocation of an offer. If I make you an offer and I intend to revoke it, I have to communicate to you that I have withdrawn my offer. Dickinson and Dodge says you can find out about that revocation through a reliable third party. Byrne and Leon Van Tienhoven says revocation of an offer is not effective until it's been communicated to the offeree. Coming back to Arrington and Arrington, the proposition is once an offer has been accepted, you cannot revoke it. So an offer can be revoked up until the point it's been accepted. Those of you that are familiar with English law, what's the postal acceptance rule?
As soon as you accept the offer and post a letter stating that, it becomes a binding.
Precisely when is acceptance?
As soon as the letter is dropped to the post box.
Right. So, the postal acceptance, sorry?
How is it called?
So, the acceptance is communicated when you drop the letter in the mailbox. The postal acceptance rule, I would say to you, we still look at because it's a cautionary tale about taking the time to think through what you're doing. And I'll put it to you this way. If I make you an offer and say, I offer to sell you my car for $500, let me know. The problem with that is you can accept through post. Why is that a problem?
Not needed to be communicated to you.
Well, it is being communicated to me.
You don't know.
Maybe you don't know.
Yeah, I don't know at that time.
Was that time?
So, and if Canada Post has anything to do with it, no offense to any postal carriers, it can get lost. And I never know. So the postal acceptance rule is something that offerors and us advising offerors have to be careful with to contract out of. If you, as in my example, if you just say, let me know, you have not contracted out of the postal acceptance. How do you contract out of the postal acceptance rule?
It's related to the offer itself, the method of
Yeah.
communication.
So Hallwell Securities,
Yeah.
the case that you have in the notes, they say, I need your response by this time in writing. That is contracting out of the postal acceptance rule because you are stipulating how acceptance is to be communicated and giving a timeline. It's not good enough that you just put your acceptance in the mail, because that's all that the postal acceptance rule requires. But today, we have instantaneous communication. what does in Torres tell us about instantaneous communication? Are the rules the same as the postal acceptance rule or different?
Different.
Okay, 50-50 chance. Why are they different?
Well, the acceptance is effective at the time of the receipt as opposed to postal rule.
It's more specific than that though. Right, and we see that in the Brimnets. So together, Torres and the Brimnets give us some instruction. We can say instantaneous communication, acceptance in instantaneous communication arises when it has been, when the acceptance has been received. But we amend that or add to that that it's the next reasonable opportunity the party has to receive. So if you are, and hopefully you aren't, dealing with a fax, maybe you miss it, or maybe you don't want to see it. The court is saying on an objective assessment, acceptance is communicated at the next reasonable opportunity you have to have received it. So if you communicate acceptance at 6 p.m., or as lawyers in Toronto like to do, and I hate it, send you something at 5 p.m. on Friday, the next reasonable opportunity will be 9 a.m. on Monday for you to have received that. Why is that important? Why? Why is it important in terms of instantaneous communication when acceptance would have been reasonably received?
Is it office hours?
Office hours, but also maybe you've made other arrangements with the item in the interim. Unless there is a promise to keep something available, which is backed by consideration, a concept we'll look at, you don't have to keep it open. So if over the weekend you sell the item, the person can't say, well, I faxed to you my acceptance at 6 p.m. on Friday. Well, that's not the normal working hour.
Well, shouldn't that also depend on the circumstances? I mean,
Sure.
Everything is contextual. If you're in the heat of making a deal, then the lawyer's office would work until 3 hours in the morning.
I wouldn't communicate that. I think, you know, if you're, what is it, some places don't operate on Mondays. If it's well known that you are not open on Mondays, then that wouldn't be the next reasonable opportunity. With businesses that have a reputation for working all the time, I'm a bit hesitant to say, well, I sent it at 1 a.m., why didn't you get it? I think the court would take a more reasonable approach than as soon as it was sent, it was received. And that would, we don't really have cases on email, but I would suggest, and why we look at these instantaneous communication cases, is that I think the reasoning would be similar. So just because you emailed someone at 1 a.m. does not mean that they received it at 1:01. It'd be the next reasonable opportunity within this idea of business hours.
Mr. Limar, talking about reasonable, I think the future tendency is because of this digital overwhelm situation which most people are facing. But actually, it's going to be more and more, that people don't check their emails all the time. They will check it twice a day, or they will check not in the weekend.
Yeah.
You know? So it's
Well,
going to be more and more,
but that-
people more and more aware, actually.
Yeah, so getting, we're sort of minding the details. What I've noticed, and I don't understand why people do it, is people will push their emails to their phones. I don't know why people do that. Because it means you can get your email anywhere. I don't want to get my email anywhere. If you email me at 5 a.m., I don't want to know. So if my emails are pushed to my phone and I get an alert, is it not harder to say, I didn't get it? This is why when we look at the instantaneous communication cases, somebody can say, well, I didn't get that fax.
But one thing is to get it, and another thing is that you are reacting on it. I mean, yes, you might
Yeah,
have
but-
on your phone your...
But reaction
your
isn't
email, but you
necessarily
don't
part of
open
it.
for the weekend.
We may not like the timing, but if if it's 10 a.m. on a work day and we receive this, then it's reasonable that we received it at some point in that day. You know, we can't sort of be willfully blind to it. So, yeah.
But there is not an exact time during the day that we say this is the time that they receive it.
Well, if it comes down to that, then you get into a lot of details about email servers and so on, which can happen. But I would suggest nothing should be left to that kind of a situation. Like the postal acceptance rule, I think we have to be a bit savvy about how we approach things and what kind of circumstances we leave ourselves open to. Yeah.
I was going to go back to the postal acceptance rule, because outside of registered post, I gather there have been some cases about, people sending acceptances, you can post a letter at 11:59 p.m., on deadline day. And presumably under the postal acceptance rule, that would have constituted acceptance within time limit, I guess.
Yeah.
So does one apply the same sort of principle to an email that's sent at...
No, that's why I was talking about the instantaneous communication. I was using the postal acceptance rule to say, more generally, it shows how we have to be careful about what we do. So if I'm making an offer, I'm going to take every opportunity to make my life easier when I make that offer. I'm not going to say, I offer to sell you my car, let me know. No timeline, nothing. That would be silly. And certainly if we didn't advise people to avoid that, we would be negligent. That's the point. So using the postal acceptance rule as an example of with offer, with acceptance, take the opportunities you have. Create the scenario you want that fits best for you. Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of going back to like just British common law. There are some exceptions as well to the postal rule. And it's just as where the offer may expressly exclude postal.
Yeah, well, as I said, generally with postal acceptance, we should contract out of it. There's no reason today for any lawyer to be litigating the postal acceptance. But like, I remember when I practiced, I remember one of the clients was a construction company. Like for business, they were great. For contract stuff, it was horrendous because they never did anything in writing. People will call them up and say, I need a cement truck here tomorrow. And they say, okay. What are the terms?
Cement truck?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. So,
Cement truck tomorrow.
So, like, as I say, great for business because they're always doing stupid things. But horrendous to litigate. Because what do you have? You have an oral contract.
Well, there's also a difference in bargaining power of the parties. Because the guy who jumps from the phone, hits the truck and delivers the cement is the guy who's desperate for the business. The guy who's not desperate for the business calls Professor Manian and talks to him for half an hour, pays him $500 for half an hour and additional $500 for a contract, then faxes the contract
Is that a
over.
discount?
No discount, with Professor
So
Manian.
500 is a discount.
So
Yeah.
it depends how desperate you are, and the lack of bargaining power is the same. For example, if you're selling something on Kijiji or Auto Trader, you're gonna snap on an offer on Saturday night at 11 o'clock. You'll do a counter offer on Sunday morning. It depends.
Maybe,
how-
but we
how-
saw with Wellman, it isn't necessarily that way. It does matter who's doing what. Two consumers.
Can we use any means of communication for offer and acceptance? For
Yeah.
example, like I send you a WhatsApp.
Yeah.
And when I see like two correct, like green correct sign.
Yeah,
that's
you could do that.
Definitely.
But what I would say is it may sound pedantic, but I would want things in writing. I wouldn't want to rely on the two blue check marks.
That's why you have the forms.
Yeah.
That's why you have the
So
forms.
theoretically, you can contract however you want, like smoke signal. How we know the Pope is allowed. But I don't think that's the most savvy way. So if we have the opportunity to create the circumstances for acceptance, my point is, why wouldn't we use them to the fullest extent? And limit our exposure to problems. Because that's what we're being paid for. If the client comes to us, like the construction company I was talking about, after the fact, then we bill them. Any other questions? Did they talk to you about Lord Denning and foundations?
No.
He was on the bench till 100, right? They had to remove him. And not be
He's a
like they had, he was elevated to the House of Lords, and he didn't like the cases he got there.
He was big on equity, I understand.
Yeah.
He was big on a lot of things,
Yeah.
mostly Lord Denning. And he went back to the Court of Appeal. And he's done some things, but some things he's just really created a lot more work. But we don't really have that equivalent here of Lord Denning. We have Laskin, Dixon,
Some might say McCaffrey might be the equivalent.
McLaughlin.
Yeah, McLaughlin is the Chief Justice.
Yeah, it depends on what area of law you work in. If you work in trust law, you're not a fan of hers.
But they didn't live so long.
But
They didn't live so long, You need to live till 100 to make so
yeah, but
many
why is he on the
cases.
bench at 100? That's why I want, are we really bereft of replacements? That we need the guy that saw the last century on the bench? Wasn't he around when the light bulb was invented? Like literally. So anyway, I'll send you tomorrow a problem question and we'll pick up with certainty.